Prosecution were heard on Wednesday at the trial of journalists accused of aiding the Muslim Brotherhood, now considered a terrorist group by the authorities. The next hearing is scheduled for March 24th. Now, the 20 defendants, including 3 Al Jazeera English journalists, are also accused of spreading false news. The case has been condemned the world over, with growing concern for freedom of speech in Egypt. Our team there sent us this report.
Assem Mohammed and Adel Fahmy, the brothers of jailed Al Jazeera journalists, share their concerns. For more than 2 months, Egyptian-Canadian Mohammed Fahmy and Egyptian Baher Mohammed have been in detention, along with their Australian colleague Peter Grest. All 3 work for Al Jazeera International and are accused of manipulating footage and supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, that's now been branded a terrorist organisation. Their family members say the accusations are without grounds and they shouldn't be in jail.
He would never, ever jeopardize the well-being of Egypt. There are no evidence to incriminate them. It's not right to play around with people's lives like that.
Fahmy and Grest were arrested at this hotel in Cairo on charges of working without a permit. Egyptian television aired this footage, filmed just after their arrest, playing suspenseful music in the background and showing their mobile phones as if they were evidence at a crime scene. Cameraman Mohammed was roughed up by police and arrested at his home. He wrote a letter from prison to his wife and 2 children, defending the freedom of speech.
He said he was just trying to do his job and be professional. He didn't understand why they were arresting journalists when the revolution was supposed to have brought freedom of expression back to the country.
The 2 men think the arrests were an attempt by the Egyptian authority to try and silence the Qatar-based channel. Accused of helping a terrorist group, the journalists could face up to 15 years in prison. Shaima Abul-Kai works for the Committee to Protect Journalists, a media watchdog. She's concerned about the rapid decline of press freedom in her country.
We're seeing flagrant attacks on journalists by security forces and random arrests targeting all types of journalism. The CPJ has placed Egypt as the 3rd deadliest country in the world for journalists on the job.
Foreign journalists working in the country are also beginning to feel a change in the climate, like Ursula Lindsay, an American living in Egypt for 12 years.
So I worked at independent magazines, local magazines under Mubarak, and there were certainly concerns with censorship, with negative reaction from the state. But overall, we were not anywhere near as concerned as we are today. We definitely have less freedom of expression and more suspicion towards journalists and hostility towards journalists than I think at any time that I've been here.
This hostile sentiment towards foreign journalists has in part been driven by state and private Egyptian media, portraying them as being supportive of Islamist groups. When the army drove the Muslim Brotherhood out of power last July, the international media called the move a coup d'etat, angering many in the Egyptian public. Hani Farag, a reporter from Nile TV, shares the public's feeling.
Foreign journalists have become persona non grata here in Egypt. They defended the so-called legitimacy of the Muslim Brotherhood to rule the country when the people rejected them.
In the increasingly polarized atmosphere, it's become difficult for the media to have dissident voices heard. Contacted by France 24, the Egyptian authorities have so far declined to talk about the subject. While reiterating their commitment to respecting the freedom of expression, they remain vague about the rights of journalists to interview members of the banned Islamist movement.
And for more on concerns over press freedom in Egypt, I'm now joined from Vienna by Alison Bethel Mackenzie. She's the Executive Director of the International Press Institute, or IPI. Hello, thank you very much for being with us. Now,
hi, thanks for having me.
First of all, what's your reaction to that trial of journalists that's been adjourned for a 2nd time? How worrying is that?
Oh, it's very worrying. First of all, we don't believe they should be in jail. We don't believe that journalists should go to jail for what they report or what they write, or someone's belief that they are one-sided and not on another side. So we think that they should be released at the very least on bail or their own recognizance until the charges are brought or until they appear before a judge. So we think that this delay is sort of a tactic. And in fact, it's working because journalists are self-censoring. They are afraid to report, not only in Egypt, but in countries that use terrorism, loose terrorism threats or laws to put journalists in jail and behind bars.
Now, you were in Egypt in January, I understand, with IPI colleagues. Did the authorities really listen to what you had to say?
I hope they did. I think that we worked a long time to be able to get there and to meet with the appropriate people who actually have a voice in what is happening to the journalists there, as opposed to simply spokespeople. And I think that they did listen, and they demanded that we listen to their concerns, most of which centered around complaints about the kind of coverage that Al Jazeera has been doing in Egypt. I think that there is a great disdain for Al Jazeera and its coverage. Many people believe that it's very biased, and we kept hearing that repeatedly. And they use this belief that Al Jazeera's reporting is biased as a means, we believe, to put them in jail.
So what were your main recommendations to the authorities?
Well, the first one, I think, and a really important one, is that the 90% of the Egyptian population in January 14, 15, approved a referendum that would change the Constitution. It's an amendment to the Constitution that would allow for greater press freedom. In fact, it's one of the best amendments or best laws of its kind in the world in terms of press freedom and freedom of expression. So our first recommendation would be that the people of Egypt and the Egyptian government live up to the letter and the spirit of the Constitution that was passed by 90% of the population of Egypt. And of course, right up there with that is that we ask that all the journalists, all 20 plus of them, are released immediately from jail and that charges be dropped against them. And we would recommend or like to see Al Jazeera and the Egyptian authorities come together and sit at the table to discuss whatever their differences may be and to find a way forward.
Now, you were telling us before what the authorities told you when you met them. What about Egyptians in general? Do they support that trial against the journalists?
Well, we mostly spoke to Egyptian journalists who are based in Cairo. We did not have the opportunity because we arrived on the 3rd anniversary of the revolution to move about freely in the country, in other major cities. But the reporters and editors all believe that Al Jazeera specifically is being targeted, although I should mention that there are other journalists who have been detained and some thrown out of the country that are not Al Jazeera journalists. We've had incidents with Turkish journalists, Yemen journalists, but generally speaking, most of the journalists believe that there is a movement against this one media company, that being Al Jazeera. All of them agreed that the punishment is not putting journalists in jail. So they were all on one accord about that. One of the most disturbing things is that the journalists, almost all of them without fail, are very concerned about what they see as a decline in press freedom in Egypt. Many of them are fearful. One female editor told us that she has to look over her shoulder now more than she ever has, and that she is afraid that at some point one of the authorities, someone from government or military personnel, might come into their newsroom and arrest them because they don't like something a story that they ran or an advertisement that they ran. And this sort of fear is very bad for Egypt and very bad for the region.
You say there's been a decline in press freedom. When did this start? Because in our report, there's a journalist, an American journalist, who says that things have got a lot worse since Mubarak was toppled.
Yeah, in fact, that's the general belief by a lot of people. Before 2.5 years ago or so, Egypt was not on the radar in terms of one of the worst places for journalists to work, in terms of being deadly or also being harassed or detained. Now it is in the top 8 deadliest places or most harmful places, most difficult places for journalists to work. And that is a major change for Egypt. Before, Egypt had some issues, very minor issues, I would say. You still had some self-censorship. Of course, government media would toe the government line, as government media does in all countries where government media exists. But now we're seeing journalists who are having their equipment taken, who are being arrested, who are being attacked, women who are being molested while doing their jobs as journalists. And this is of grave concern to us.
Alison Bethel Mackenzie, thank you very much indeed. Alison Bethel Mackenzie from the International Press Institute. Now it's time to go to a short break. When we come back, I'll have the headlines for you. And in culture, we'll be delving into the mysterious world of American film director and musician David Lynch. Stay tuned.